Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the spectral shadows of ancient China, a world where the line between the living and the dead wasn't a solid wall, but more like a flickering rice paper screen that could be torn through at any moment. Imagine a time before streetlights and concrete, where the deep darkness outside your mud brick home was filled with the rustling of bamboo and the whisper of things that weren't quite alive anymore. We're talking about ghosts, but not the friendly. Casper the Friendly ghost type. No, these weren't just spooks in a sheet, they were bureaucratic nightmares, vengeful spirits with very specific demands, and house guests you absolutely, positively did not want to host. Seriously, you'd probably survive a zombie apocalypse better than you'd survive an accidental haunting by one of these ancient entities. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a farmer, living in a small village during the Han Dynasty. The sun has set, painting the sky in strokes of deep crimson and gold, and now a cool, damp darkness is settling over the fields. The day was long, filled with back-breaking labour in the rice paddies, and your muscles ache with a familiar, pleasant weariness. You've had your simple dinner of millet and vegetables, and now you're getting ready to unroll your sleeping mat. The flickering oil lamp casts long, dancing shadows on the walls of your modest home. The world outside is silent, save for the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a dog. But you know that silence isn't empty. It's filled with the unseen, the unheard, and the entities that walk the lonely paths between worlds after the sun goes down. Tonight, however, that silence feels different, a little too quiet, a little too heavy. It's the kind of quiet that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. A primal instinct that whispers that something has disturbed the natural order of things. You see, in ancient China, the dead didn't just disappear. They didn't ascend to a heavenly plane or descend into a fiery pit of damnation. Instead, they went to a place called the underworld, or Diu, but getting there was no easy feat. It was a long, arduous journey, and the path was fraught with peril. The dead were a huge part of everyday life, and the relationship between the living and the deceased was a complex, transactional one. The goal was to ensure your ancestors were happy and comfortable in the afterlife, because if they weren't, they would come back, not for a friendly visit, but to make your life a living hell. They were the ultimate house guests, because they could show up uninvited, never leave, and were almost impossible to get rid of. The entire cosmology was built on this idea of cosmic balance, of yin and yang. The living world was yang light, warmth, energy. The underworld was yin dark, cold, spectral. When a person died, their soul was supposed to transition from the yang realm to the yin realm. But what if that transition was incomplete? What if the body wasn't buried properly? What if the family forgot to perform the correct rituals? Or, most terrifyingly, what if the person died a violent, unnatural death? That's when you had a problem. That's when the doors to the underworld didn't quite close all the way, and a vengeful spirit, a Gai Gui, could slip through. A common belief, one that served as a central pillar of societal structure, was that your dead needed to be tended to. This wasn't just a matter of respect, it was a matter of survival. You had to provide for them. This is where the practice of burning joss paper and other offerings came from. You weren't just burning fake money for fun. You were paying your ancestors' way in the afterlife. You were sending them houses, clothes, food, and even servants. Think of it as a divine Kickstarter campaign, but one where the consequences for not donating were absolutely catastrophic. If your ancestors' bank account in the afterlife ran dry, they became hungry ghosts, and they'd come back to you, their living descendants, to collect. The ancient Chinese didn't see the dead as formless, wispy things. They had a physical presence, a chilling coldness that could drop the temperature of a room, a weight that could press down on your chest. You might feel a sudden, inexplicable gust of wind indoors, or see a flickering shadow that wasn't cast by the lamp. These weren't mere psychological tricks. They were physical manifestations of a spirit's desperate existence. This is a very different world view than what many of us are used to, where ghosts are often portrayed as transparent and unable to interact with the physical world. For the ancient Chinese, the dead were very much a part of the physical world, just a part that was out of place. The journey to the underworld was a significant, mythic event. It was a long road, often described as a journey across a desert or a vast, empty plain, the soul, the po-por, and the spirit. The hun-hun were two different parts of the soul, and their fates after death were distinct. The po was the physical, corporeal soul, tied to the body. The hun was the ethereal, spiritual soul. When you died, the po was supposed to stay with the grave, while the hun was supposed to journey to the underworld. If you didn't get a proper burial, or if your grave was desecrated, the po would be disturbed. It would become a lost, confused entity, a hungry ghost, unable to find rest. The hun, on the other hand, was the one that faced judgment in the underworld. The underworld itself wasn't a single place, but a complex, bureaucratic system. It was modelled after the imperial courts of ancient China, complete with judges, courts, and punishments for your earthly transgressions. Your journey through Diyu was a process of being judged for your sins. You would be interrogated, tried, and if found guilty, subjected to punishments that were far more terrifying than anything a mortal could inflict. These were not eternal punishments. They were meant to cleanse you of your sins so you could be reborn. But the process was so long and so terrifying that no one wanted to go through it without a little help from their living family. This brings us to a key detail that's often overlooked. The ancient Chinese believed your dead could be helped by the living. This wasn't a one-way street. Your filial piety, your respect for your ancestors, was your insurance policy. If you took care of them, they would, in turn, protect you. They could warn you of danger, bring you good fortune, and ensure your crops were bountiful. But if you neglected them, if you forgot to burn joss paper or pay homage at their graves, they would become angry. And an angry ancestor was the worst kind of ghost. They knew you. They knew your vulnerabilities, and they had a vested interest in making your life miserable until you corrected your mistake. The logic was simple. A comfortable ancestor meant a safe and prosperous descendant. A suffering ancestor meant a cursed, unfortunate one. It was a terrifying, yet logical, system of cosmic reciprocity. One particularly fascinating and obscure historical detail relates to the practice of spirit marriage. If a young man died before he was married, his parents might arrange a posthumous marriage for him. They would find a deceased single woman's family and marry their son to her. The ceremony would be conducted with effigies or tablets representing the deceased couple. This was done to ensure the son had a wife to care for him in the afterlife and to prevent him from returning as a lonely, angry ghost seeking a partner among the living. It was believed that a ghost with a partner was a content ghost, and a content ghost was a ghost that stayed put. The lengths to which families went to ensure the peace of their dead shows just how terrifying the alternative was. Historians still debate whether the fear of angry ghosts was a genuine, deeply held belief or a clever social tool used by the ruling class to enforce filial piety and social order. Some scholars argue that the terrifying stories of vengeful ghosts were a way to ensure that people stayed loyal to their families and elders, even after they were gone. After all, if the consequence of not respecting your parents was a lifetime of bad luck and misfortune caused by their spectral return, you were far more likely to behave. However, others contend that the belief was so pervasive and so deeply ingrained in the culture that it had to be a sincere part of their cosmology, a fundamental understanding of how the world worked. It's a chicken and egg problem. Did the culture create the fear? Or did the fear shape the culture? We'll probably never know for sure. But the stories themselves are all the proof you need that the fear was very, very real. Imagine it. You're alone in your hut, and the light from your oil lamp flickers. You hear a sound outside, a scraping noise, like a shovel being dragged over dry dirt. You tense up, your heart pounding. Is it a wild animal, a traveller, or is it something else in your culture? The first thought isn't of a thief, it's of a guy. A guy could be the ghost of a person who drowned, who was murdered, who died in battle far from home. A guy was a ghost with a grudge, a ghost with unfinished business, and their unfinished business was now your problem. You clutch the small wooden charm around your neck, a simple piece of wood with a carved character, a small prayer to the gods. You hold your breath, listening. The scraping sound stops, the silence returns, but it's not the same silence as before. It's colder, heavier, and you can't shake the feeling that you're no longer alone. This is the kind of world you lived in, a world where the dead were never truly gone, where they were always just a misplaced offering or a forgotten ritual away from becoming a terrifying presence in your home. The relationship was delicate, a balancing act between respect and fear. And tonight, as the wind whispers through the thatch of your roof, you can't help but wonder if you've done everything you were supposed to. Did you remember to burn enough joss paper? Did you clean your ancestors' tablets? Did you say the right prayers? You close your eyes, trying to will yourself to sleep, but the image of a lost, lonely spirit, cold and hungry, standing just outside your door, is a thought that's hard to shake, and as the final embers of your lamp flicker and die, you are left in the profound, consuming darkness of ancient China, where the dead are always watching. Last time, we left you in the quiet darkness of your Han Dynasty hut, listening for the telltale signs of a ghostly visitor. You were worried about making a mistake, forgetting a ritual, missing an offering, and for good reason. In the ancient Chinese worldview, a hungry ghost wasn't just a metaphor for a needy spirit, it was a real, tangible threat born from your own negligence. The world of the afterlife and the world of the living were inextricably linked, and that connection was a two-way street. Tonight, we're going to step a little further into that cosmology, exploring the very real terror of the hungry ghost and the ancient system of filial piety that was meant to keep them at bay. You finally managed to drift off, but your sleep is restless. You're plagued by dreams of a gaunt, shivering figure, its eyes hollow and its mouth agape. It's reaching for you, its fingers long and bony, a chilling cold emanating from its form. You wake with a gasp, a sheen of sweat on your forehead. The oil lamp is out, and the room is pitch black. But the cold remains. It's not the night air, it's a presence. It's a hungry ghost, or a guy. Now, don't just think of this as a starving person's spirit. The term hungry ghost is a specific and terrifying classification of the dead. These weren't just random spirits. They were individuals who, in their earthly lives, had committed sins of greed, gluttony, or wastefulness, or, just as likely, they were the ghosts of people whose descendants had failed them. Their punishment in the afterlife was a constant, insatiable hunger and thirst that could never be quenched. They have tiny mouths and needle-thin throats, so even when they find something to eat or drink, they can't consume it. The food turns to ash, the water to fire. It's a literal, agonizing form of eternal suffering, and when they're suffering, they come back to the place they knew your home to look for relief. This is where the ancient Chinese societal structure of filial piety comes into play. You see, the most important relationship in your life wasn't with your spouse or your children, but with your parents and, by extension, your ancestors. Filial piety wasn't just a nice idea, it was a cosmic law. The well-being of your ancestors in the afterlife was your direct responsibility. Their hunger was your fault. Their suffering was your burden. You were the only one who could save them from their ghostly predicament. And if you failed, they would come back. It was a perfect system of social control, a reminder that your actions had consequences that extended beyond your lifetime. So, how do you feed a ghost that can't eat? The answer is through ritual. On the Ghost Festival, or Yulenpen Festival, held on the 15th day of the 7th lunar month, you would perform rituals and make offerings to appease these hungry spirits. You wouldn't just offer food, but also incense, flowers, and most importantly, joss paper. You'd burn stacks of intricately folded paper money, paper clothes, and even paper houses. The smoke from the burning paper was believed to carry the items to the afterlife, where your ancestors could use them. It was a symbolic act. Yes, but for the hungry ghost, it was a lifeline. You'd set up an altar with platters of rice and various dishes, but you couldn't eat it yourself until the ritual was over and the ghosts had had their fill. To do so would be to invite their fury. Imagine the scene: you're standing in the middle of your home, the air thick with the smell of incense, the floor covered in ashes from the burnt offerings, and you're surrounded by the unseen, the cold, the hungry. You're feeding them, but you can feel their hunger. A fascinating and a little known historical detail is that these hungry ghosts weren't just a threat to the living, they were also a major concern for the dead. Other, more powerful spirits and the judges of the underworld saw them as a nuisance, a sign of disorder in the cosmic balance. They were a problem to be solved. And so, the rituals of the Ghost Festival were not just for your ancestors, but for all the hungry ghosts, the nameless, the forgotten, the ones with no living relatives to care for them. You were performing a kind of cosmic charity, a ritual to ensure that the gates of the underworld remained closed and that the spectral hordes were kept at bay. It was a collective responsibility, a social contract with the dead. The act of burning joss paper, in particular, is a great example of this belief system in action. You're not just sending them a little bit of money, you're sending them wealth. The more money you burn, the wealthier your ancestor becomes in the afterlife. But you have to be careful. You can't just burn a pile of paper and call it a day. The paper must be folded correctly, with certain characters and symbols drawn on it, or the money would be useless. It's a bureaucratic nightmare, even in the afterlife. It's a reflection of the earthly imperial court, where every document, every plea, every transaction had to be done with the proper seal and in the proper format. The dead were just as concerned with paperwork and protocol as the living. Historians and anthropologists have long debated the true origin of the hungry ghost concept. Some argue it was a Buddhist import, a way to explain karmic retribution and the cycle of rebirth. Others point to earlier indigenous Chinese beliefs, arguing that the Buddhist concept simply provided a more formal and structured framework for a fear that already existed. The debate centres on whether the idea of a ghost being hungry was a pre-existing folk belief that was later codified by Buddhist teachings, or if the entire concept was introduced as a part of the religion's expansion. Regardless, the two ideas merge seamlessly, creating a powerful and enduring mythos that shaped daily life for centuries. You would have grown up hearing stories about the hungry ghost, not as a fairy tale, but as a very real warning. You're a child now, and your grandmother is teaching you how to fold the joss paper. Her fingers are quick and nimble, a lifetime of practice in every fold. She tells you to be careful, to make sure the folds are sharp and clean. The spirits are particular, she whispers, her voice low and serious. If the money is sloppy, they won't accept it, and if they don't accept it, she trails off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. You nod. your small hands fumbling with the paper. You're terrified of making a mistake. You're terrified of what will happen if you do. And so, every ritual, every prayer, every offering becomes an act of self-preservation. You're not just honouring the dead, you're protecting the living. You're ensuring that the doors of the underworld stay closed, that your ancestors are well fed and content, and that no desperate, hungry spirit ever knocks on your door again. This cosmic bargain, this quid pro quo with the dead, was the bedrock of your society. It taught you respect, it taught you duty, and it taught you a deep, abiding fear of what happens when that duty is neglected. The hungry ghost wasn't just a scary story, it was a constant, chilling reminder that you were never truly alone, and that your past, in the form of your ancestors, was always watching. So as you fold your paper, you don't just see a ghost story, you see the weight of your family's history and the terrifying responsibility that comes with it. Tipteo, Chungta seji sao vao and hung chitit puk tap kua underworld, mot noi kovik salan hung lai mang jam dao an kua trio jin funky and trunkwok, hai kung kampa, hitong kwan lai, katsua anfang set. Van hung hinpat kung keep jang cho joilin honban, va jung gwen, tat kan hung chitit nai jula de jam bao rang ban se kung bao giu trudhan mot, ma joy kat, lang tang trong de gioi kuang goi song. We've survived the chilling whispers of the hungry ghosts, but now it's time to face the inevitable. Tonight, we're going to talk about death, but not in the way you'd expect. We're not talking about a peaceful ascent to the heavens. We're talking about paperwork, trials, and a journey through a bureaucratic nightmare that makes a trip to the DMV look like a vacation. Welcome to DU, the underworld, a place where your afterlife is a direct reflection of the imperial court system you just left behind. Imagine you've just drawn your last breath. The world fades to a cold, misty grey. Your spiritual self, the home we talked about before, separates from your body. You're not floating in a white light. You're standing at a crossroads, a desolate, windswept plain with a single, long road stretching out before you. This is the beginning of your journey to DU. This isn't a place of fire and brimstone. It's a place of halls, courts, and a long queue of souls waiting for judgment. Your first stop is the underworld's bureaucracy. You see, the ancient Chinese believed that the afterlife was a meticulously organized system. The underworld was ruled by Yan Wang, the king of hell, and a host of 10 judges who presided over 10 separate courts. The system was designed to be a mirror of the earthly bureaucracy. Each court had its own specific function, its own set of records, and its own punishments. And you, the deceased, were a simple citizen, a new subject in a new, terrifying kingdom. Your life on earth, every good deed and every misdeed, was recorded in a great ledger. These weren't just memories, they were official documents, irrefutable evidence for your trial. As you begin your journey, you'll encounter your first guide, a faceless official who looks suspiciously like the one who used to collect your taxes. They are there to escort you to the first court. This is not a choice. You can't run or hide. You are a spirit, and you are bound to this path. The first court is where your life's records are presented. The judge, a stern, imposing figure, will read through the scroll that details your every action. This is the moment of truth. Did you honour your parents? Did you pay your debts? Did you live a life of virtue? The judge will know. The scroll will not lie. This belief system is a brilliant example of social engineering. The fear of this posthumous bureaucracy was a powerful deterrent against a life of crime or immorality. It was a constant reminder that your actions had consequences that extended beyond your time on earth. You couldn't bribe your way out of it, and you couldn't run from it. The courts of DU were incorruptible, or were they? This leads us to a fascinating and little-known historical detail. The practice of spirit money wasn't just for your ancestors' comfort. It was also used to pay off the officials of the underworld. That's right. You were literally bribing the dead. You would burn stacks of joss paper, But you would also burn paper effigies of horses, servants, and even gold and silver ingots. This was meant to ensure your ancestors had the means to grease the palms of the officials in DU, to make sure their journey through the 10 courts was a smooth one. It was a way for the living to influence the bureaucracy of the dead, a kind of posthumous legal aid. Think about that for a second. You're not just ensuring your ancestor is well fed, you're giving them the means to navigate a corrupt, bureaucratic system in the afterlife. It's a chillingly pragmatic view of the universe, even in death. Power and influence still depended on wealth. The rich could afford a better journey through the underworld than the poor. It's the sad truth that mirrors the earthly world, a kind of cosmic fatalism. Historians still debate whether this practice was a sign of a deep-seated cynicism about the legal system, or a hopeful belief that family love could transcend even death. Some scholars argue that the burning of spirit money was a way to subvert the rigid, impersonal bureaucracy of the underworld, a way to show that family ties were more important than divine law. Others contend it was a sign of the deep-seated mistrust the common people had for any kind of authority, whether earthly or divine. The act of burning money for the dead was an act of both piety and defiance. You're saying, "My family is so important, I will break your rules to protect them, even in the afterlife." The journey through the 10 courts was a terrifying ordeal. Each court was responsible for a specific type of sin. The first court judged your general life. The second judged those who committed suicide. The third judged those who disrespected their parents. The punishments were horrific, but they weren't eternal. They were meant to be a form of cleansing. You would be boiled, sawed in half, or have your tongue ripped out, all to atone for your sins. Once you had paid the price, you would be reborn, but the process was so agonizing that no one wanted to go through it. This brings us to one of the most famous figures in this cosmology, Mongpo, the Lady of Forgetfulness. She resides at the end of the journey, at the 10th court. Her job is to give every soul a bowl of a special herbal tea, the soup of forgetfulness. This soup erases all your memories of your previous life, all the good and all the bad. It's a cruel and a merciful act all at once. It allows you to be reborn without the baggage of your past life, but it also erases every memory of your family, your friends, and your loved ones. The bond of filial piety is severed, and you start anew. But what if you didn't want to drink the soup? The stories say that some souls, in their desperation to remember their loved ones, would try to avoid drinking the tea. They would be punished. Their souls ripped apart and scattered. It's a chilling, heartbreaking detail. It shows the true power of family and memory, a power that could defy even the laws of the underworld. You, as a living person, would have grown up hearing these stories. You would have learned to fear not just death, but the journey after death. You would have learned that your life was not just your own. It was a testament to your family, your ancestors, and your place in the cosmic order. You would have learned that every action you took, every word you spoke, was being recorded in a great celestial ledger, and you would have learned that the best way to ensure a peaceful journey for your Hun was to live a good life, a life of respect and honour. This belief system was a kind of spiritual checks and balances. It was a way to keep the living honest, and a way to provide comfort to the living, a kind of assurance that their loved ones were being cared for in the afterlife. But it was also a system of terror, a constant reminder that there was no escaping judgment. No matter how clever you thought you were, it was a world where a misplaced offering or a forgotten ritual could have terrifying consequences for you and your ancestors, and the only way to avoid the wrath of the dead was to live a life that would make them proud. This is the world of Du, a place of mirrors and echoes, where the living and the dead are bound by a complex web of obligation and fear, a world where your post-mortem paperwork is more important than your worldly wealth, and where a bowl of soup can erase your entire existence as you fall deeper into this cosmology. you'll start to see that the terrors of the ancient Chinese underworld were not about a monster under the bed. They were about the monstrous fear of being forgotten. Last time, we were just getting acquainted with the nightmare of bureaucracy in the underworld, a place where your afterlife depended on a system of judges, courts, and a whole lot of paperwork. But what happens when the system fails? What happens when a spirit doesn't just pass through the courts but gets stuck? Lost between worlds tonight. We're going to talk about the truly terrifying vengeful spectres and the unfinished business that keeps them from their final rest. These aren't just hungry ghosts, they are ghosts with a grudge. And that grudge is about to become your problem. Imagine this: you're a peasant, living in a small village, and there's a new spirit in town. You don't see it, but you feel it. The crops in a nearby field begin to wither and die for no reason. The local well, which has provided clean water for generations, suddenly turns brackish. A child in the village comes down with a fever that no doctor can cure. This isn't just bad luck. This is the work of a yuan-gui, a ghost who died a wrongful or violent death. A yuan-gui is a spirit that has a specific, burning reason to return to the world of the living. It could be the spirit of a person who was murdered, or someone who died in battle far from home, or even a person who was unjustly executed. The death was so traumatic, so unnatural, that their spiritual self, the hun, and their physical self, the post, couldn't properly separate. Their soul is trapped in a state of eternal anger and pain, and that anger is now being unleashed on your village. The crucial difference between a hungry ghost and a vengeful spectre is motivation. A hungry ghost is driven by a general, unending need. A vengeful spectre is driven by a very specific, very personal vendetta. The goal isn't just to get food, it's to right a wrong, to exact revenge, to complete the unfinished business of their earthly life. And their target isn't just anyone, it's the person who wronged them, their family, or anyone who was complicit in their death. But in the absence of their specific target, their anger can be so powerful that it lashes out at the entire community, causing chaos and misfortune for everyone. The ancient Chinese belief was that a proper burial and the correct funeral rites were the only way to ensure a peaceful transition to the afterlife. If these rites were neglected, or if the body wasn't found or was buried improperly, the spirit would be trapped. This is a very common trope in ghost stories, but in ancient China, it was a very real, very terrifying fear. The fear of an improper burial was so great that it was a major plot point in many of the classic stories and plays. It was a societal obsession, a reminder that the dead were a part of the community and that their proper handling was a communal responsibility. A lesser-known historical detail is the role of professional ghostbusters or exorcists. These weren't just religious figures. They were often highly respected scholars or Taoist priests who had studied the intricate rituals and incantations needed to deal with these vengeful spirits. They weren't fighting with special effects and funny one-liners. They were fighting with knowledge, with ritual, and with the power of the divine. They would use things like peachwood swords, which were believed to have the power to ward off spirits, and a special type of incense that could cleanse a haunted area. The job of a ghostbuster was a serious one, a matter of life and death, and it required a deep understanding of the spiritual and bureaucratic systems of both the living and the dead. Historians still debate whether these exorcists were truly spiritual figures, or simply cunning con artists who preyed on the fears of the common people. Some scholars argue that their power came from their ability to provide comfort and a sense of control in a world filled with the unpredictable chaos of the supernatural. By giving people a ritual, a set of actions to take, they were giving them hope. Others contend that they were simply manipulating a deep-seated cultural fear for personal gain, using theatricality and showmanship to convince people they had supernatural powers. Regardless of their true nature, they were a very real part of the societal fabric. a kind of spiritual fire department that you would call when the doors to the underworld had swung open a little too wide. One of the most terrifying aspects of a vengeful spectre is their ability to possess the living. They weren't just a cold spot in a room. They could enter a person's body and take control. You'd see a family member, someone you'd known your whole life, suddenly acting strange. Their voice would change, their eyes would become hollow and cold, and they would say things that were not their own. This wasn't just a sign of mental illness, it was a sign of a very real, very dangerous spiritual possession. The only way to save the possessed person was to perform an exorcism, a terrifying and often dangerous ritual that would pit the exorcist against the full power of a vengeful ghost, and if the exorcism failed, the possessed person could be driven to madness or even death. Think of it this way: a hungry ghost is a nuisance, like a leaky roof. A vengeful spectre is a fire that will burn your house down. They are a force of nature, a spiritual tsunami that can destroy your life and the lives of everyone around you. They were a constant reminder that the dead were not to be trifled with, and that a life of virtue and honour was not just a moral good, but a matter of spiritual self-preservation. You, as a young person in this society, would have learned to fear not just the dark, but the stories of the dark. You would have learned the names of the famous yuan-gui, the ones who had terrorized villages and brought ruin to families. These weren't just scary stories, they were morality tales, a kind of cosmic justice system that reminded you that your actions had consequences. It taught you that if you wronged someone, if you cheated them, or if you failed to honour a promise, you weren't just hurting them in this life. You were creating a monster that could come back to haunt you and your descendants for generations. The fear of the vengeful spectre was a kind of spiritual insurance policy. It ensured that people behaved with a certain level of decorum, that they honoured their debts, and that they treated each other with respect. It was a system of social control, but one that was so deeply ingrained in the culture that it was almost impossible to separate from genuine spiritual belief. And as you fall asleep tonight, with the sounds of the wind rattling your windows, you can't help but wonder if there's a story, a wrong that was never righted, a ghost that's still looking for revenge, and you can only hope that their vendetta has nothing to do with you. Tipteo. Chungta se kampa motrong, nhung hintung, makinuiting nadvajang sonadgua, trungku kongti, hei kon goi lak saksong nai. Chungta se tim hiu ngonguk guachung, ta sau chung lai nai. Vakash banko de song sot kicham tranwai motrong nhung sin wat chang so nai. We've faced the hungry ghosts and the vengeful spectres, but tonight we're going to talk about a monster that is both a ghost and something more terrifyingly physical. We're talking about the jiangshi, or the hopping corpse, the ancient Chinese equivalent of a zombie. But with a horrifying twist. This isn't just a monster that shuffles along, it's a creature that embodies the very worst fears of an improper death and a corrupted afterlife. Imagine you're walking along a lonely road at night. The air is cold and heavy, and a thick fog has rolled in from the nearby fields. You hear a sound in the distance, a rhythmic thumping, a kind of hopping. It's not a person, it's not an animal. The sound gets closer, and you can make out a figure in the mist. It's a man, but his body is stiff. His arms are outstretched, and he's moving by hopping. His skin is pale, his eyes are vacant, and his fingernails are long and sharp, like claws. This is the jiangshi, and it's looking for one thing: your life force, your qi. The legend of the jiangshi is a direct result of the ancient Chinese belief that an improper death could create a spiritual and physical abomination. A jiangshi is a corpse that has failed to decay properly, instead of its spirit. The hun, moving on to the underworld and its physical soul, the puva remaining with the grave, both get trapped in the body. This creates a creature that is neither fully alive nor fully dead, a physical manifestation of a spiritual failure. The jiangshi is a walking, hopping corpse, animated by a malevolent force. The reason it hops, its joints have seized up, and it can't bend its knees. It has to move with a series of stiff, powerful leaps. The stories of the Jiangshi often came from a specific historical context. A common origin for a Jiangshi was a person who died far from home in ancient China. It was considered a great shame to be buried away from your ancestors. The practice of corpse transportation, where a specialized priest or Taoist master would use magical techniques to reanimate a corpse just enough for it to hop its way home for a proper burial, was a real thing. The idea was that the priest would use a talisman, a piece of yellow paper with a special incantation, to control the corpse and guide it back to its family. This practice was meant to be a great act of filial piety, but it also gave rise to the terrifying idea of what could happen if the talisman fell off, if the spell failed, or if the priest was a fraud. A Jiangshi created this way would be a monster that was not a zombie in the traditional sense. It was a corpse being controlled by a powerful magic. The danger came when that magic failed. This brings us to a fascinating and little-known detail. The Jiangshi wasn't just a mindless monster. It was believed to be an abomination that drew its power from the life force of the living. It could drain your qi, making you weak and sick. Its breath was toxic, and its touch could freeze you to the bone. The only way to stop a Jiangshi was with specific, ritualistic tools. You couldn't just shoot it or hack it apart. You needed a peachwood sword, the same kind of sword used by Taoist exorcists. You needed a handful of glutinous rice, which was believed to have a purifying effect on the corpse, and you needed a talisman, a piece of yellow paper with a special incantation, to pin to its forehead. If you managed to pin the talisman to its forehead, the Jiangshi would freeze in place, its magical life force halted. It was a terrifying and specific set of rules, a kind of metaphysical game of chance where the stakes were your very life. Historians and folklorists still debate the true origins of the Jiangshi myth. Some scholars argue that it's a metaphor for the fear of outsiders, of people who died far from home and whose spirits were not properly cared for. The Jiangshi, with its pale skin and stiff movements, is a kind of other, a thing that doesn't belong and is a threat to the community. Others contend that the myth arose from a genuine misunderstanding of the process of decomposition. Corpses can sometimes stiffen and move in strange ways as they decompose, and in a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural was thin, it's easy to see how a stiff, moving corpse could be interpreted as a supernatural monster, regardless of its origin. The Jiangshi myth was a powerful and enduring part of Chinese culture, a constant reminder of the dangers of an improper death and a failed ritual. You, as a person living in this world, would have learned to be very afraid of the Jiangshi. You would have been taught to keep a peachwood sword in your home, to keep a bag of glutinous rice on hand, and to never, ever be out on the road at night when the fog rolled in. The Jiangshi wasn't a monster from a movie. It was a very real, very present danger. It was a terrifying embodiment of what could happen when the sacred bonds of filial piety and the proper rituals were ignored. It was a monster born from the fear of being forgotten, of being unloved, and of having a final resting place that was far from home. The Jiangshi myth is not just a monster story. It's a story about the importance of family, of tradition, and of the sacred duty we owe to the dead. It's a reminder that a life lived improperly, or a death handled without care, can create a monster that will not only haunt you in the afterlife, but will come back to terrorize the living, and as you fall asleep, you can't help but wonder if the thumping sound you hear in the distance is just your neighbour working late, or if it's the rhythmic hop of a corpse that's just a little too far from home. Tipteo. Chungta sekam fa mut loai, yu kwai kas. Tin kwai van gui him kong kem holitin. Van hung kun kui luagat kas. Chungta se tim hiu tai saon hung sin vat nai laiko. The kwai en ru van gui him genvai. Va kash ban ko de pan beat moten gui ban voi mot kon kui jang tim kash. Shim juat lin hon ban. We face the physical terror of the Jiangshi, a monster born of a corrupted corpse. But tonight, We're going to talk about a different kind of horror, one that is subtle, intelligent, and infinitely more seductive. We're talking about fox spirits and other deceptive demons. Creatures that don't just want to kill you, but want to trick you, to corrupt your soul, and to steal your very essence. These are not monsters you can fight with a sword. They are monsters you fight with your mind, your wit, and your moral compass, and your moral. Imagine you're a young scholar, a man of letters and a man of virtue. You're walking home after a long night of studying, and you see a beautiful woman standing under a willow tree. Her hair is black as a raven's wing, her eyes are like polished jade, and her skin is as pale as moonlight. She smiles at you, a smile that promises a world of pleasure and passion. This is not a woman. This is a huli jing, a fox spirit, and she is about to become the most dangerous thing you have ever encountered. A fox spirit, or huli jing, is a type of demon that is often described as being able to shapeshift into a beautiful woman or, less commonly, a handsome man. But they are not just shapeshifters. They are ancient, powerful, and incredibly intelligent creatures that have learned the secrets of the universe. They are a physical embodiment of the duality of nature, the yin and yang. They can be good or evil, helpful or destructive. But the most famous stories, the ones that kept you awake at night, were always about the evil ones, the ones that used their beauty to lure men to their doom. The legend of the fox spirit is deeply rooted in the ancient Chinese belief in animal spirits and the idea that all things in nature have a spirit, a soul, a kind of cosmic energy. It was believed that animals, especially cunning and intelligent ones like foxes, could, over time, learn to cultivate their energy, to learn magic, and eventually to shapeshift. The longer a fox lived, the more powerful it became. 1,000-year-old fox could become a powerful demon, a creature of immense power and malevolence. These were not just animals. They were ancient beings that had lived through centuries of human history, and they had a deep, cynical understanding of human nature. They knew our weaknesses, our fears, and our deepest desires, and our deepest. This brings us to a little-known historical detail. The fox spirit was not always seen as a negative figure. In some traditions, especially in the northern parts of China, the fox spirit was revered as a kind of divine being, a minor deity that could bring good luck and prosperity. People would build small shrines to them, offering them food and incense in exchange for their blessings. This is a fascinating contrast to the more famous stories of the fox spirit as a malevolent demon. It shows the complexity of the ancient Chinese belief system, a world where the line between a god and a demon was often blurred, and where a creature could be both a source of good fortune and a source of great terror. It's a testament to the idea that a creature's nature was not inherent, but was shaped by its actions and by the way it was treated by humanity. Historians and folklorists still debate the true meaning of the fox spirit myth. Some scholars argue that the myth is a metaphor for the fear of powerful, independent women, especially women who had sexual or social power. The fox spirit, with her beauty and her ability to manipulate men, is a kind of cautionary tale, a warning against the dangers of female sexuality and the chaos it could bring to a patriarchal society. Others contend that the myth is a kind of spiritual checks and balances, a reminder that the world is not just black and white, and that even a beautiful, alluring creature could be a source of great danger. The fox spirit is a reminder that you cannot judge a book by its cover, and you cannot trust a person based on their beauty alone. The fox spirit's ultimate goal wasn't just to kill you, it was to drain your life force, your very essence, to make itself stronger. It would seduce you, enter into a relationship with you, and then, slowly, over time, it would drain you of your vital energy. You would become weak, sick, and eventually you would die. The fox spirit, on the other hand, would become stronger. Its beauty would become more radiant, and it would be able to live for another century. It was a parasitic relationship, a kind of spiritual vampirism, It's a terrifying thought. A reminder that the most dangerous monsters are not the ones you can see, but the ones you welcome into your life. Another lesser known but equally terrifying demon was the Jimu, or the spider demon. These were not just spiders, they were giant. Intelligent spiders that could shapeshift into beautiful women and lure men into their webs. They would trap their victims, not just to eat them, but to drain their life force over a long period of time, slowly absorbing their energy until they died. The Jimu was a kind of anti-fox spirit, a creature that used its beauty not for seduction, but for a cold, predatory kind of murder. You, as a young scholar, would have been taught to be wary of beautiful strangers. You would have been taught to look for the signs, the little things that would give them away. A fox spirit would often have a tell, a small detail that was not quite human. Maybe their reflection was not quite right, or their shadow was a little too long. Maybe they had a faint smell of musk and wild things. You would have been taught to trust your instincts, to trust your gut, and to never, ever let your guard down, because in a world filled with shape-shifting demons, a moment of weakness could be a moment of death. The fear of the fox spirit was not just a fear of the supernatural, it was a fear of the unknown. It was a fear of the wilderness, of the strange, and of the things that lurk just beyond the reach of human civilization. It was a reminder that the world was a dangerous place, filled with creatures that were older and smarter than you, and that the only way to survive was to be vigilant, to be wise, and to never, ever be naive. And as you fall asleep, you can't help but wonder if the beautiful woman you saw in your dreams was just a dream, or if she was something more, something ancient, something with a taste for human energy. Tipteo. Chungta se trang bicho min kana hung ken tu kantet, je joy po voin hung de luxio ni enne. Chungta se kamfa te goi kwan hung papsu. Na hung labua homen. Van hung kung kukua jo gyao chuok sudung je truta. Sua joy ma quiva bao vengoi song koi suk samhab, kwa the gyoi benkia. We've journeyed through the terrifying world of the hungry ghost, the vengeful spectre, the hopping jiangshi, and the seductive fox spirit. The common thread in all these tales is a world filled with danger, a world where the supernatural is a constant, terrifying presence. But the ancient Chinese weren't defenseless. They had a whole toolkit of spiritual defenses, a rich tradition of exorcisms, talismans, and the Taoist toolbox that was meant to keep the dead in their place and the living safe. Tonight, we're going to explore that toolbox, learning about the rituals and tools that gave the ancient Chinese a fighting chance against the darkness. Imagine you're a farmer, and your son has fallen ill with a mysterious fever. The local doctors are baffled. They've tried every herbal remedy in their book, but nothing is working. The boy is weak, his skin is cold, and he talks in his sleep about a strange woman with eyes like jade. You know this isn't a normal sickness. You know this is the work of a demon, a fox spirit that has taken a liking to your son and is slowly draining his life force. This is not a problem for a doctor. This is a problem for a Taoist priest, a man who has dedicated his life to understanding the delicate balance between the yin and yang, the living and the dead. The Taoist priest, or fashi, would arrive at your home with a bag full of tools. He's not a doctor, but he's a healer of a different kind. He doesn't carry a scalpel, he carries a peachwood sword, a powerful weapon against the supernatural. Peachwood, in ancient China, was believed to have a special, divine energy, an ability to ward off evil spirits. The sword wasn't just a symbol, it was a physical tool, a way to channel the energy of the divine and to physically strike at a spirit. The priest would also bring a handful of a glutinous rice, a common food that was believed to have a purifying effect on the dead. He would sprinkle it around the house, especially in the corners and around the windows, to create a spiritual barrier that a jiangshi or a hungry ghost could not cross. He would also have a bag full of talismans, small pieces of yellow paper with intricate characters and incantations drawn on them in red ink. These talismans were like spiritual contracts, a kind of command to the spirits to leave or to be bound. They were a powerful tool, a way for the priest to use his knowledge of the supernatural to control and contain the chaos. The exorcism itself was a terrifying and dramatic affair. The priest would chant, his voice low and powerful, calling on the gods and the spirits to aid him. He would use his peachwood sword, not to strike your son, but to draw a spiritual line in the air, a kind of invisible boundary that the demon could not cross. He would burn incense, the smoke filling the room with a thick, fragrant cloud, a purifying agent that was meant to drive the demon out, and he would use a divination plate, a kind of spiritual compass, to locate the demon's weakness, its spiritual Achilles heel. A little known but fascinating detail about these rituals is the use of the 8 trigrams, or bagua, a set of 8 symbols that represented the fundamental principles of reality in Taoist cosmology. The priest would often have a bagua mirror, a round mirror with the 8 trigrams around the edge, which was believed to have the power to reflect a demon's true form and to repel it. He would hang this mirror over the door of your house, a kind of spiritual alarm system that would warn you if a demon was trying to enter. The use of the bagua was not just a ritual, it was a kind of spiritual science, a way for the priest to use his knowledge of the cosmic order to restore balance to a world that had been thrown into chaos by a supernatural intruder. Historians still debate the efficacy of these rituals. Some scholars argue that they were a form of primitive psychotherapy, a way for people to regain a sense of control in a world filled with the unknown. The rituals provided a narrative, a story that explained the unexplainable, and they gave people a set of actions to take, a way to feel like they were fighting back against the darkness. Others contend that these rituals were a real and powerful part of the ancient Chinese world, a kind of magical system that was just as valid as any other form of science or medicine. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The rituals may have been as much about the psychological comfort they provided as they were about their actual supernatural power. But for the people who believed in them, they were a real and necessary part of daily life. The Taoist toolbox was not just for professional exorcists. The common person also had their own set of tools to ward off evil. You would hang a sprig of mugwort or calamus over your door on the Dragon Boat Festival, a traditional ritual that was believed to have the power to ward off evil spirits. You would wear a small jade pendant, which was believed to have a purifying effect on the soul and to protect you from spiritual attacks. You would burn a special kind of incense in your home, the smell of which was believed to be unpleasant to the spirits. These were not just superstitions, they were part of your daily life, a constant reminder that you lived in a world where the line between the living and the dead was thin, and that you had to be vigilant at all times. The world of ancient China was not a place of helpless victims. It was a place of active participants, of people who had a deep and abiding belief in their ability to fight back against the darkness. They had a language of ritual, a toolbox of spiritual defences, and a deep-seated knowledge of the cosmic order that allowed them to navigate a world filled with hungry ghosts and vengeful spectres. The fear was real, but so was the ability to fight back. And as you fall asleep, you can find a small bit of comfort in the thought that you too have a set of spiritual tools, a kind of cosmic fire extinguisher. Should the doors of the underworld ever swing open a little too wide in your own life. Tipteo, chung ta te kampani hung noi bimam, na hung nangonjoy lan leo, na hung nangoi na habo hoang, va vai tro qua fong fui trong vichik sat jing sujang, so qua na hung noi jo, chung ta se tim heo tai somot noi nao jo lai bimam, kach chung ta koden hanbit, valio kode lamgi de lam du noi so hai jo. We've armed ourselves with the knowledge of Taoist exorcists, but now it's time to talk about the battleground itself, the haunted place. Tonight, we're not just talking about a house with a spooky history, we're talking about a landscape that is fundamentally wrong, a place where the spiritual energy, or ki, has been corrupted. We're going to explore the ancient Chinese concept of haunted places and the feng shui of fear, a belief system that taught you to be afraid not just of what was inside a house, but of the house itself and the land it was built on. Imagine you're a farmer, and you've saved up enough money to build a new home. You've found a beautiful plot of land, a small hill overlooking a flowing river. It seems perfect, but before you even lay the first brick, you must consult a feng shui master. This isn't just about good interior design, this is about survival. The feng shui master would use a luopan, a kind of spiritual compass, to analyze the flow of qi in the land. They would look at the direction of the river, the shape of the hills, and the alignment of the stars, and they would tell you that this beautiful plot of land is a yin ground, a place where the yin energy of the earth is too strong, a place that is already a gateway to the underworld. Building your home there would be an invitation to the dead, a kind of cosmic open house for every ghost and demon in the area. Feng shui, in ancient China, was not just about arranging furniture for good luck. It was a complex, esoteric science that was meant to ensure that the living and the dead coexisted in harmony. It was a kind of spiritual geomancy, the art of reading the spiritual landscape. The goal was to build a home, a tomb, or a village in a place where the qi was balanced, a place where the yang energy of the living was strong and the yin energy of the dead was contained. A place with bad feng shui was not just an unlucky place, it was a dangerous place, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, and a place where you could easily become a victim of a haunting. A truly fascinating and little-known detail about feng shui is its application to tombs and burial sites. A family's prosperity was believed to be directly linked to the quality of their ancestor's tomb. A good feng shui master would spend months, even years, searching for the perfect location for a tomb, a place with a strong, positive qi flow that would ensure the family's good fortune for generations. But what if the tomb was built in the wrong place? What if it was built in a yin ground, a place where the earth's energy was corrupt? The ancestors in that tomb would not rest in peace. They would become angry, vengeful ghosts, and their anger would be directed at their living descendants, causing them misfortune, sickness, and even death. This is why the job of a feng shui master was so important. They were not just decorators, they were spiritual architects, the guardians of the delicate balance between the living and the dead. Historians still debate the true nature of feng shui. Some scholars argue that it was a form of proto-science, a kind of empirical observation of natural patterns that was later codified into a spiritual system. They point to the fact that good feng shui often means building a house with good ventilation, a strong foundation, and a good view, all of which are practical considerations for a healthy and prosperous life. Others contend that feng shui was a purely spiritual system, a form of ancient magic that was as real and as powerful as any other form of divination or ritual. They argue that the belief in the power of qi was so deep-seated in the culture that it was impossible to separate the spiritual from the practical. The truth is probably a mix of both. Feng shui was a system that was both practical and spiritual, a way to build a house that was not only structurally sound but also spiritually safe. The fear of haunted places was a very real part of daily life. You wouldn't just avoid a house because of a bad feeling. You would avoid it because you knew the stories. You would hear about the old mill where a man died a violent death, and now his spirit, a yuan guy, still stalks the grounds at night. You would hear about the deserted well where a woman drowned herself, and now her spirit, a shui guy, or water ghost, tries to pull unsuspecting victims into the water with her. These weren't just urban legends, they were morality tales, a kind of spiritual cartography that warned you of the dangers of the landscape. They were a reminder that the world was a living, breathing thing, and that it had a memory, a kind of spiritual record of every tragedy and every act of violence. The haunted place was not just a place where a ghost lived, it was a place where the natural order had been disturbed, a place where the yin and yang were out of balance, and the only way to fix it was with ritual, with ceremony, and with the help of a feng shui master. The master would use a series of rituals to cleanse the land, to banish the spirits, and to restore the balance of qi. He would use talismans, incense, and his knowledge of the bagua to make the land safe again, but the fear would always remain, a quiet whisper in the back of your mind, a reminder that the land itself had a dark secret, a story that would never be forgotten. The ancient Chinese didn't just fear the monsters, they feared the places where the monsters lived. They feared the land itself, the hills and rivers and forests that were a constant, terrifying reminder that the world was a dangerous place and that you had to be vigilant at all times. And as you fall asleep tonight, you can't help but wonder if your own home, your own land, has a story to tell, and you can only hope that its story is a peaceful one. Tip Teo, Chung Tase, Tim Huvekashan Goi Song Van Goi Ket Chung Song Hoas Kong Trong, Modde Gioi Maran Gioi Giwa, Hai Koirat Mongman, Chung Tase Kampan Hung Ngile, Hungkam Kivan Hunkash, Tukman Goi Ko Jai Dongje, Dui Trimotsu Kembang Mongman, Vajugi Sexaira Kisukan Bangjo Bifavo. We've spent 8 chapters delving into the fears of ancient China, but tonight we're going to talk about a more hopeful, if still fragile, side of things. We're going to discuss how the living and the dead coexisted in a world where the line between them was paper thin. This wasn't a world of constant terror. It was a world of complex rituals, delicate negotiations, and a profound respect for the unseen. Tonight, we're exploring the rules of the game, the rituals and taboos that kept the living and the dead in a state of fragile peace. Imagine you're a young man, and your father has just passed away. The funeral is not just a ceremony, it's a series of meticulously planned rituals designed to ensure your father's spirit, his hun, travels safely to the underworld, and his physical soul, his po, stays put with his body. This isn't just a matter of respect, it's a matter of survival. An improperly handled funeral could turn your father's spirit into a vengeful spectre, a yuan-gai, a monster you created with your own negligence. The funeral rites themselves were a fascinating mix of reverence and practicality. The first step was to hold a proper vigil, to wash the body, and to place it in a coffin. But the rituals didn't stop there. You would hire a group of professional mourners, people who would wail and cry for a living. This wasn't because you were too stoic to cry yourself. It was a kind of spiritual theatre, a way to show the gods and the spirits that your father was a loved and respected man, and that he had a family that would miss him. The more wailing, the more respected the deceased. It was a kind of spiritual one-upmanship, a way to show the world that your family was a force to be reckoned with, even in death. This brings us to a fascinating and little-known detail. The period of mourning, which could last for up to 3 years, was a crucial part of this process. During this time, you would live a life of austerity. You wouldn't eat meat, you wouldn't drink alcohol, and you wouldn't wear bright, colourful clothes. You would live a life of quiet reflection, a kind of spiritual penance for your father's death. This wasn't just a sign of respect, it was a way to ensure that your father's spirit was not disturbed. A period of mourning was a kind of spiritual quarantine, a way to ensure that the gates of the underworld remained closed and that your father's journey to the afterlife was a peaceful one. Historians and anthropologists still debate the true meaning of these long mourning periods. Some scholars argue that they were a form of social control, a way to ensure that people stayed loyal to their families and elders and that the social order remained intact. Others contend that they were a genuine expression of grief and that the rituals were a kind of spiritual therapy, a way for people to cope with the profound loss of a loved one. The truth is probably a mix of both. The rituals were both a genuine expression of love and a practical tool for maintaining social order. They were a reminder that the dead were a part of the community and that their proper handling was a communal responsibility. The living also had a set of taboos, a kind of spiritual rule book that you would follow every day. You would never, ever point at a rainbow, for fear of angering the spirits who lived in the sky. You would never sweep the dust out the door at night, for fear of sweeping away the good spirits and inviting the bad ones in. You would never, ever whistle at night, for fear that you would call out to the lost spirits, the ones who were wandering in the darkness. These were not just superstitions, they were a part of your daily life, a constant reminder that the world was a delicate balance of the seen and the unseen, and that you had to be careful at all times. The most terrifying taboo of all was the one about calling a person by their full name at night. It was believed that a ghost, a demon, or a fox spirit could use your name to gain power over you, to bind you to their will. So, at night, you would refer to your family members by nicknames or by their relationship to you. You would call your son Little Tiger and your daughter Little Flower, but you would never, ever use their given names. It was a small but crucial detail, a kind of spiritual insurance policy that you would follow every night, a constant reminder that you lived in a world where the wrong word could have terrifying consequences. The world of ancient China was not a place of helpless victims. It was a place of active participants, of people who had a deep and abiding belief in their ability to fight back against the darkness. They had a language of ritual, a toolbox of spiritual defences, and a deep-seated knowledge of the cosmic order that allowed them to navigate a world filled with hungry ghosts and vengeful spectres. The fear was real, but so was the ability to fight back. And as you fall asleep, you can find a small bit of comfort in the thought that you too have a set of spiritual tools, a kind of cosmic fire extinguisher, should the doors of the underworld ever swing open a little too wide in your own life. Next, we're going to talk about what happens when the dead come back, not as monsters but as a kind of ghostly after-party. We'll explore the idea of reincarnation, final judgments, and the ultimate goal of the ancient Chinese afterlife to be reborn, but only after a long and terrifying journey. We've journeyed through the terrifying world of the hungry ghost, the vengeful spectre, the hopping Jiangshi, the seductive fox spirit, the Taoist exorcist's toolbox, and the haunted landscape. We've learned about the rituals and taboos that kept the living and the dead in a fragile, terrifying balance. But tonight, we're going to talk about the final act, the ultimate goal of the ancient Chinese afterlife to be reborn. We're going to explore the ghostly after-party, a world of reintegration and final judgments, a place where every soul gets a second chance, but only after a long and terrifying journey. Imagine you're a soul, and you've just made it through the 10 courts of the underworld. You've been judged for your sins, you've paid your karmic debts through a series of gruesome punishments, and you've finally arrived at the final court. This isn't a place of torture, it's a place of transition. This is the court of Meng Po, the Lady of Forgetfulness, the final stop before you're reborn. Her court is a beautiful, serene place, a stark contrast to the horrors you've just endured. But don't be fooled by the beauty. This is a place of finality, a place where your old life, your old self, is about to be erased forever. The legend of Meng Po is a hauntingly beautiful and cruel story. She stands at a bridge, the bridge of helplessness, and she offers every soul a bowl of a special herbal tea, the soup of forgetfulness. This soup is not just a drink, it's a kind of cosmic eraser. It erases every memory of your previous life, every moment of joy, every moment of pain, every memory of your family, your friends, and your loved ones. It's a merciful act, a way to ensure that you're not born into a new life with the baggage of your old one, but it's also a cruel act, a kind of final severance from all that you ever were. The goal is to be reborn with a clean slate, to start over, to have a second chance, but that second chance comes at a very high price. This brings us to a fascinating and little-known detail. The ultimate form of filial piety wasn't just to mourn your dead, It was to ensure they had a good rebirth. You would burn special kinds of joss paper, not just for money and clothes, but for a good rebirth, a kind of karmic insurance policy. You would pray to the gods and to your ancestors, asking them to ensure that your loved one would be reborn as a healthy, prosperous person, not as a sickly animal or a poor farmer. The act of burning joss paper was not just a way to pay for your ancestors' afterlife. It was a way to influence their next life, a kind of cosmic lobbying. Historians and scholars still debate the true meaning of the reincarnation myth in ancient China. Some argue that it was a way to explain the randomness of life, a kind of karmic justification for why some people were born rich and others were born poor. It was a way to make sense of a world that was often cruel and unfair. Others contend that the myth was a powerful tool for social control, a way to ensure that people lived a virtuous life. If you knew that your actions in this life would affect your next life, you would be more likely to behave. The truth is probably a mix of both. The reincarnation myth was both a comforting explanation for life's mysteries and a powerful tool for maintaining social order. But what if you refused to drink the soup? The legends say that some souls, in their desperation to remember their loved ones, would try to avoid drinking the tea. They would be punished, their souls ripped apart and scattered, or they would be thrown into a terrifying river of blood. It was a kind of final, brutal act of defiance, a way for a soul to say that their love for their family was more important than their own rebirth. It's a heartbreaking and beautiful detail, a testament to the power of family and memory, a power that could defy even the laws of the underworld. The final judgment wasn't just about your sins, it was about your life, the kind of person you were, and the kind of person you were trying to be. It was a kind of cosmic performance review. The judges of the underworld would look at your ledger, and they would make a decision. Were you a good person who made a few mistakes, or were you a truly evil person? Your rebirth would be a direct reflection of that judgment. You could be reborn as a king, a scholar, a soldier, a farmer, or even an animal. The possibilities were endless, and the choice was not your own. You, as a living person, would have grown up with these stories. You would have been taught to live a life of virtue, of respect, and of honour. You would have been taught that your actions had consequences that extended far beyond your lifetime. You would have been taught that your life was not just your own, it was a part of a larger, cosmic cycle of death and rebirth. And you would have been taught to fear not just the terrors of the afterlife, but the terror of a bad rebirth. A rebirth as a sickly animal or a poor farmer. The fear of a bad rebirth was a powerful motivator, a constant reminder that your life was a precious gift, and that you should not squander it. This is the world of the ancient Chinese afterlife. It's a world of terror and hope, of cruelty and mercy. It's a world where a bowl of soup can erase your entire existence, and where your final judgment is a direct reflection of the kind of person you were. It's a world where the living and the dead are bound by a complex web of obligation and fear, and where the ultimate goal is not to ascend to a heavenly plane, but to be reborn, to have a second chance, to start over. And as you fall asleep, you can't help but wonder if your own life is a second chance, a kind of cosmic restart, a new beginning after a long and terrifying journey.